Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Welcome back. This is Talking Books and Writing and Stuff, the podcast that talks about books and writing and stuff. And today we have tracked down Gord Hume from London, Ontario, and we're talking about some of his books. He has 3 non-fiction books out there. 3 fiction books, rather, and lots of non-fiction books and all sorts of other stuff. He's eaten mussels in Brussels. He's been everywhere. He's done everything. Gord Hume, welcome to the program.
Dennis, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be with you.
That's great. And you have a new book out. It's called Singapore Sling. Now this
No. Singapore Bling.
Singapore Bling. Singapore Sling is a drink, and I had too many of them, and that's why I came up with that title. It's Singapore Bling.
Yeah. I've had Singapore Slings at the famous Raffles Hotel in Singapore. And in Singapore Bling, I wrote a scene about that experience.
And this is a series, right? There's 3 of them now?
Yes, working on the 4th and planning a 5th.
And this is about Samantha and the sheriff. So the sheriff, is he unnamed, or is he just the sheriff in your books?
No, he has a name, but we call him the sheriff most of the time.
Okay.
And they met in a condo in Florida when he almost arrested Samantha because she was the main suspect in a murder in the hot tub.
And in Florida, a murder in a hot tub would not be unusual.
And that was the story of the first book, which is called Sapphire Blue.
And then Alligator Alley?
Alligator Alley is the second one, and by that point, Samantha and the sheriff were in a hot relationship. And then the series continues from there.
All right, and it's from Burnstown Publishing. Now, that's an Ontario firm, is it?
Yeah, they're in Ottawa, and a small boutique publisher. And the books are being very well received out there, Dennis.
That's good. That's great. And backing up a bit, as I mentioned to Gord earlier, before we rolled tape, as we used to say, we were sort of in the same high schools separately but together. So that was in Saskatoon years ago. Where did your life and career take you from high school? What happened after high school for you?
I went to the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon for a while, was bored to death, and fell into broadcasting at CKOM Radio in Saskatoon, and spent several years there. Left to come to Southern Ontario, where I ran the Miss Canada pageant for a year, then got back into broadcasting, and spent the rest of my career in broadcasting in Southern Ontario.
And you're also involved a lot in municipal government and as a public speaker?
I ended up running some radio stations in London, Ontario, and several years ago we sold them. I liked the city. I wanted to stay here, and I realized that I didn't like what the city council was doing at the time. So I ran for a seat on city council. To the shock and horror of many, I got elected 4 times to city council. And so part of the books are also talking about local government, what happens at city council and so on. And that's a bit of a theme through the books as well. And it kind of adds a bit of a different approach, talking about local government and the inside stories of city halls.
And is it as interesting behind the scenes as one might think, or is it the old, once you see a sausage being made, you never want sausages again? Or?
No, I've always believed that local government in most countries is in fact the most important order of government, because it's what affects people's lives the most. when you think about it, everything from the shower in the morning to turning the lights on to driving on the roads to the office you work in or business you run or the home you have is all impacted enormously by local government. And so I've always thought that was the most important kind of government for people. And it gets, frankly, the least amount of attention, which I always feel is very sad.
And these days, with the cutback in news organizations, or so it seems, and newspaper coverage, there's perhaps a diminishing amount of information available to the general public about the governments of their own backyards.
Dennis, you make a really interesting and an important point there, because I worry desperately about how people are going to get accurate, fairly neutral, unbiased information in the future. Because more and more, as you say, the media in Canada are being diminished. Newsrooms are shrinking. Local news is being impacted negatively. And I spend a bit of my time in Florida in the winter, and so I get exposed to U.S. media down there. And I have to tell you, it's quite horrifying to see the slant that media is indulging in the U.S. And that's coming across the border into Canada. So more and more you're seeing news media. And I was taught in my day, back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, when I was deeply involved in broadcasting, that news stories were news stories, and they weren't to be tinged with your opinion or political slant or anything else. And what I'm finding more and more now is that politics has gotten so divisive and so extreme, particularly in the U.S., and particularly, frankly, with Donald Trump.
Exactly.
He has driven a lot of this. And people are either for or against on a lot of issues. And we're losing that critical central middle ground, which is, frankly, where most good public policy happens. And the media are not doing a really good job of explaining that to people. And I find more and more people are only watching or listening or reading the media to support their point of view. And that's not healthy either.
No, yeah, you're right. It's like it's either us or them. Like my side's right and yours is wrong, and then that's it. No looking at facts or anything like that. It's it just seems to be, and politics is looked at almost like a sporting event. Like, oh wow, let's see who won this one, and let's chalk up the points, and it has nothing to do with what goes on in your daily life. But hey, it's entertaining to watch these car wrecks all the time.
Yeah, and when you see some of the political stuff that goes on in Washington and frankly in places in Canada, we're not immune to this. It's a bloody train wreck. And it's not good for society. It's not good for our economy. It's not good for how we are going to progress and grow as a nation and as a province and as a city. And I think this is a really serious problem, because I have to tell you, I subscribe to 3 different newspapers. I subscribe online to a couple in the U.S. just to get that perspective, the Washington Post and the Tampa Bay Times. I read fairly extensively, and I really care about public issues. But it's shocking to me how few people out there are watching and listening and reading about what is really happening in their communities and in their country.
And I felt the same, actually, early on in my career. I didn't want to do news because I thought, covering City Hall would be boring. And then later on, I got more into it, and actually was living in Bellingham, Washington for a time, doing news there, and would go cover council meetings, and city of, 100,000 people, and 8 people would show up to the council meeting, and, the councillors and the mayor would probably outnumber the audience. And yet it was covered quite well.
That happens, but that's also why local media are so important.
Exactly. Well, let's go away from the real world for a minute and go back to your fantasy land about Sapphire Blue, Alligator Alley, and Singapore Bling, which is the latest one. What was the what if moment which fiction writers seem to have that made you want to sit down and create these characters and these stories? Or was
well,
there?
I've always had an enormous love of books. When I was growing up as a kid, going to the library on Saturday morning in downtown Saskatoon was an absolute joy to me. I've always liked books, and I've written 7 nonfiction books about local government, quite frankly. And I speak all over the world about municipal affairs and creating better communities and cities and so on. Writing the novels, frankly, is great fun, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And the idea first came a few years ago when I was renting a condo in Florida, and the condos were run by a bunch of mean little women sitting around the pool, and they ordered the social life of the entire condo complex.
I've heard this story before. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law had the same situation sort of interrupt at their condo in Saskatoon. They finally left. But yes.
Yeah. So I watched them operate, and I watched what was happening. And I said to myself, gosh, there's a little social structure here. It's like your own little enclave, your own little universe. And what they do and how much they drink and the rules they have around what goes on in the pool and the complex and so on was really fascinating to me. So the idea came out of that. And so then I started inventing characters and writing the stories, and it just kind of flowed from there. But that was the genesis.
And then one thing led to another, as they say, and here we have the 3 books, and you said there's more on the way. You're writing the 4th one now?
Yeah, the 4th one is called Martinis and Manicures. And it's based on a fundraiser that a friend of mine threw for me some years ago when I was still running for office as a fundraiser. And we got a bunch of important women in the community together, had a social event for them where they would drink. It was a mojitos in those days, but I changed the title to martinis. And they got their nails done at this event, and then I came and spoke. And we raised a lot of money. It was great fun. Other than some of the ladies got a little high. I walked in the middle of this thing. Hey, he's here. Take your clothes off. Oh God, get me out of here.
Well, I guess municipal politics is more fun than we imagined.
Oh, you have no idea. I tell some stories in the books about semi-true things that happened in my political career and so on, and some of them are really quite funny. I talk about a guy who came to public meetings, and this actually was true. He used to wear a metal colander on his head. You know those big things you use in the kitchen to strain vegetables?
Right.
And he wore that upside down on his head to combat the rays that City Hall were directing at his brain.
Oh, no. Actually, that's quite sad in retrospect, but at the time it was like, oh, well, here we go with another one, getting messages from the mothership. But yeah. So
you get some interesting characters at City Hall.
No kidding. So you've done lots of traveling, obviously. Have you ever had a martini in Manchuria?
No, but I've had Peking duck in Beijing.
And how was it?
It was wonderful.
And what about this strange fish or something, unknown fish in down South America somewhere?
Well, I've had lots of fish in South America and Central America. I lived in Guatemala for a few weeks. I was helping some radio stations. And I also lived in Ukraine for 6 weeks, just after the wall fell down. And that was a very interesting experience. I barely survived it, but it was interesting. Totally different lifestyle down there, I can tell you that. So that might impact fifth book. Yeah, we'll see about that. I like to write about things I've experienced that I know about. But the books, Dennis, are kind of romantic comedies with intrigue and great plot twists and some interesting characters. And in the latest one, Singapore Bling, we get a couple of con artists who invade the condo, and they end up taking some of these women for a lot of money, and that gets Samantha and the sheriff involved. They end up chasing them to Singapore. Then you get a big $1 million diamond necklace involved. A couple of very interesting Chinese characters. A Chinese grandmother who's just a wonderful character in the book. And flim flam and con and surprise twists, and they end up in flying back through Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, and it's just kind of a really wild chase and a lot of fun. The readers who are just getting it now, I've already had some feedback. They just love the book. They love the plot twist. They love the humor in it. In this day and age in which we're all living, probably some laughs are a good thing for people. So the book is just great fun, and it's a wonderful read.
And we're talking with Gord Hume, based in London, Ontario, but been pretty much everywhere else, doing all sorts of business and speaking and lectures, etc. You talked about Ukraine. Lots of people from Saskatchewan have a Ukraine background, ancestry. Is that involved in your family at all?
No, we were Scottish and British, but I remember with great fondness the O&O Drive-In in Saskatoon.
Oh, that's right.
It was the only Ukrainian drive-in restaurant I've ever heard of in my life.
Exactly.
Don't know if it's still there.
Sadly, no. The city's changed. The city has changed. There's high-rises and skyscrapers and all sorts of bizarre stuff like that. Because I only came back here about 20 years ago from the West Coast, so...
Yeah.
And then we moved out to a small town here. So the books from Gord Hume that we're discussing today, the Singapore Bling, and then you can backtrack a bit and get Sapphire Blue and Alligator Alley. They deal with lots of shenanigans that Samantha and the sheriff get up to. Now, is this kind of a Nick and Nora Charles type approach? Is that how they...
Yeah. Samantha kind of blunders into some of the cases the sheriff is handling, and sometimes she helps, sometimes she doesn't. And they have a very volatile relationship, and that creates great fun. And then a couple books ago, I introduced a new character, which is the sheriff's dog, Rosie. So Rosie is now a part of the books, and people love Rosie as a character. I mean, it's just amazing the feedback that I get about Rosie.
Gord Hume is with us today, author of Singapore Bling, Sapphire Blue, Alligator Alley, and more than a half dozen non-fiction books, mainly dealing with municipal politics, climate change, government affairs, things like that. And you were talking about Ukrainian food. Now, you went to Ukraine, you said, to do some work with radio stations over there?
Yeah, shortly after the wall fell, of course, they were trying to develop a free market economy. So I was asked by a Canadian organization to go over as a volunteer for 6 weeks and help a radio station, a private radio station in Ukraine, get started and operating. And so I did that and loved the people. It was a very hard time, though. They didn't have much, and the weather wasn't wonderful, and I was all alone in a hotel, and the Ukrainian mafia worked out of the same hotel.
Ouch.
And you don't want any part of the Ukrainian mafia over there, I can tell you that.
No.
So I treated them very respectfully.
Yep.
And ended up on the leaving after my time was over on the midnight train from Moscow. And it's a long story. We don't have time now for me to tell it, but it involves a lot of vodka and 2 hookers from Moscow and a train going to Budapest, and it's a long, involved story.
It sounds like a spy novel right there.
Yeah, in some ways it was, I can tell you that.
Gord Hume is with us today. It's been an excellent, exciting, interesting visit. Singapore Bling, Sapphire Blue, Alligator Alley. But like all writers and authors these days, Gord, I'm sure you have a website out there.
Yes, gordhume.com, GORDHUME.com. And that's probably the easiest way for people to go into order books, because frankly, online these days, with everything that, the retail economy is still pretty slow and it's difficult. So the best way to get the books is through my publisher, Burnstown Publishing. And you can connect with them through my website. And they can get me by email. I'll be happy to help them, with information on ordering or anything that they would like. And I love to hear from people. I love to hear from readers. Some authors don't. I enjoy it very much. So if they want to send me an email, it's just gord@gordhume.com.
Gord@gordhume.com. And the books are Singapore Bling, the newest one, Sapphire Blue, Alligator Alley. Lots of fun, lots of madcap romps and adventure with Samantha and the Sheriff, which also sounds like it could be a rock band like Captain and Tennille. So got all sorts of good stuff going on. Our guest today... carry on.
There's all kinds of stuff going on. And each adventure, it's quite interesting, because each adventure is quite different in its own way. But there are always some new characters, and there are always some familiar characters in the books. And each book stands alone, but it is also part of a series that people, I think, will understand and enjoy.
Yeah, that's the good part about series. Sometimes you have to read them all or get introduced to them to figure out what's going on. But other ones, lots of Jack Reacher books, lots of Travis McGee books, they all stand alone anyway. So that's a good thing to remind people of. You don't have to read one to enjoy the other.
Boy, I haven't thought of Travis McGee for a while.
Oh, one of my favorites.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
it was tragic when Jack McDonald died.
Oh, yeah, he was quite young. He's like our age, kind of. So.
Yeah.
Okay, we've been talking with Gord Hume. So, Gord, we'll let you get back to more writing, reading, and arithmetic, and whatever else you do in your daily life back there in London, Ontario. And thanks very much, and maybe you can repeat that website one more time.
Dennis, thank you for having me. It's Gord@gordhume.com is my email. The website is just www.gordhume.com. And that will connect with my publisher. You can order books that way.
Great. Thanks very much, Gord Hume. Nice talking to you.
Thanks, Dennis. Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.